Confucius said, sometimes it's only madness that makes us who we are. Actually, it wasn't Confucius that said it, it was Batman that said it, and he was not talking about Lovecraft's Arkham, he was talking about Batman's Arkham, which was based on Lovecraft's Arkham. So, in a way, you could say when Confucius did say it, he was talking exactly about this box. And in a way, he was right. But before we get into any of this, let me just say that if you've not been a part of this channel before, then when we do our board game reviews, we normally start them with a funny sketch. But this time, what I want you to do is I want you to close your eyes and just imagine the best sketch possible. It's something that's really funny and poignant, but gets to the core of the game, but at the same time kind of hyperbolizes it in all in 20 seconds, and it makes it really entertaining. And just imagining that right now. Yes, okay, so we're not going to do a sketch this time because you see, I have man flu actually, and I couldn't be bothered. There are a lot of advantages to doing a review when you have man flu, actually. For example, a lot of the editing gaffes can just be simply explained by that. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so Arkham Horror, the living card game, is a living card game. But to those of you who don't necessarily know what a living card game is, well, let me brief you on our next segment called The History of Living Card Games. At first, there was Magic the Gathering, and it was the first of its kind, a trading collectible card game where you opened randomized packs and got randomized cards. But eventually, some point, people got a little bit upset at the fact that some pieces of this cardboard cost sometimes £100, sometimes £1,000, which post-Brexit is like $20. But anyway, the point is, people got annoyed and just didn't want to do that anymore. And effectively, Fantasy Flight Games said, why don't we do card games that are not random? You get a pack every month and everyone gets exactly the same, and you know what you're getting, and you'll get the thing and you'll still get to build your deck and you get to play it. And that was great. And there was a whole slew of these living card games, and some were published by Fantasy Flight, some were published by other companies, some very successful, some not so much and have died since. But the point is, the industry was, in a way, revolutionized, which is cool. Magic's still at the top of it, but there's a healthy alternative out there, and it's just not just one alternative, there's a lot of them out there, but there was one LCG. One LCG, not so much to rule them all, but one LCG that was different. And it was different because you still got packs of cards and built your decks together, but you didn't play against each other. You played together, cooperatively. And for the longest time, the Lord of the Rings card game was a fan favorite and the only option for cooperative deck building and battling. But now we arrive to Arkham Horror. And straight out of the gates, it does something very unique. See, here I could talk about its Lovecraftian theme, but come on, let's be honest, it's 2016. Does anyone really even care anymore? Or I could talk about its narrative approach to storytelling and how it kind of borrows elements from time stories. But what I really want to talk about is the one thing that makes this game a very, very interesting proposition. You see, Magic isn't just a precursor to these types of collectible card games, it is often a model upon which the mechanisms are based. Sure, variations within each game exist, but most often you will tap things to play things and then tap them to attack other things, and once enough things hit enough other things, then someone will win. And that's fine, but there are very few games that actually break away from this mold. And surprisingly, kind of, Arkham Horror is one of them. Instead, Arkham Horror borrows its turn structure from another game called Netrunner. Every turn you have exactly 3 actions, and those 3 actions you can spend however you like. So for example, you could play a card, which could be anything from a tuna fish sized revolver to your own personal ally, which will not just be like a meat shield that will soak up damage for you, but will grant you extra abilities. Or if you want to, you can move from one location to another location and discover what it is that's hiding there. Another thing you can do is you can draw a card or simply take a resource. Each action will net you one of these, and that essentially is kind of like bulking up effectively. And finally, you can attack something if you want to, but you don't have to, because sometimes it's just as viable to take the evade action and run away. By now, if you're a fan of the original Arkham horror game or its spiritual successor Eldritch Horror, you might have noticed more than one similarity, like the inescapable Doom track that promises death at the end, much like being at a Willie Nelson concert, or a list of all white characters, which hopefully will change with the inevitable expansions. And finally, the fact that you don't have to attack, you can run away, and that's just one of the few things that are very similar to Arkham Horror. Actually, surprisingly, what this does achieve is it is less like a card game and more like a very, very streamlined version of Arkham Horror, which, if you wanted that, this will be the perfect thing for you, because every month you'll get a new expansion, you'll get a new story, and the stories conjoin together to form one long narrative. That's great, isn't it? Yes, it is. But if you are a player who is expecting a follow-up to Lord of the Rings, not necessarily in the same universe, but tight mechanics and interesting card play, this might not necessarily be a game for you. Mostly because of these dice. But you might say, hey Afka, these are not dice, they're cardboard tokens. They're only dice if you live in Flatland, and we live on Earth Prime. And you're right, they're not. Instead, what Fantasy Flight has done is come up with a very nifty solution to a problem where you have to have a custom die for each adventure that you play, and then for each difficulty setting for each adventure that you play. So instead of doing that, they kind of came up with this make your own dice bag trademark limited solution, where whenever you have to pass a test, let's say strength test, your character will have a predefined strength value, and you'll need to meet a certain target number. You can add to that number by discarding cards that have strength symbols attached to them, increasing your total. And then you'll simply draw a token from the bag, and it will modify that value by a certain number. And if you get the result that you want, then you'll succeed. And if not, you'll fail. Or you'll fail and fail some more. Or then you might really, really, really fail. Look, what the downfall of Arkham Horror LCG is for us might actually be the thing that makes it for you. In all honesty, neither me and Elaine enjoy the type of gameplay where the outcome of actions revolves around a single roll of a die or a draw of a token, if you will. But for some of you, that might be just the thing you're looking for. And if you do, then Arkham Horror might be great. Look, if you want a more streamlined approach to Arkham Horror that plays in under an hour and has a cohesive narrative approach that kind of develops over multiple stories, then this might just be perfect somewhere down the line. Why somewhere down the line? Well, Arkham Horror is obviously still in its infancy. It's a new card game, and this core set merely provides a framework for things to come. But one of the things I already immediately found very interesting, and just completely flipping around the way that you look at card games, is the experience system. See, every time you play the adventure, based on the decisions that you've made and based on certain adventure elements, you will get experience. And what do you spend your experience on? Well, you spend it on better cards. Here's the thing. There are upgraded versions of cards, or just cards that are better than what you can include into your deck at the start of the adventure. But you can't put them in a deck. So many card games revolve around, I want to find the best card possible, and make my deck out of them. Whereas Arkham Horror says, yeah, there are better cards in this box, but you can't have them. Not until you do something cool and get experience, and then you can spend that experience to build your deck more as you go along. Just that concept alone, I found incredibly intriguing and incredibly subversive in a way, and that's great. I like it. But there's another problem with Arkham Horror that kind of bothers me. Look, I mentioned that it has a narrative approach, and see, this core set, and I imagine the follow-up additional packs that you will get will form campaigns. So this core set is a campaign of its own, and it's comprised of 3 adventures that follow each other sequentially. The thing is, theoretically you could just play the middle adventure, but it wouldn't make a lot of sense, because it'll ask you what decisions you've made in the previous adventure in this campaign, and obviously you haven't made any. So if you're playing it on its own, it doesn't quite work. But the problem with it is that Arkham Horror is somewhat random, and sometimes things will be out of your control. And let's say you've played the first adventure, you did pretty well, and then you're playing the second adventure, and you haven't done so well, and you feel like you could have done better, but you haven't. And then you have to progress on to the third adventure because of how the campaign structure works. And because you haven't done so well in the second adventure, the third adventure is going to be even harder. So you feel like there's this progressive difficulty forced onto the game. And let me tell you, maybe this was just our own personal experience of playing this campaign, but we were hammered. I mean, we got beat up really hard. We weren't even close to winning. And maybe we're terrible players of this game, or maybe Lady Luck wasn't shining on our sides, but we got wrecked. And we knew we got wrecked. So when we went into our third game, we were like, well, okay, we'll lose, but let's just go through it. And then if you want to play again, you have to restart the whole thing. I wish there was a different approach. And I imagine because the expansion model is very, very vast, I mean, they can keep changing the rules as they go along. This might change somewhere down the line, and this whole narrative thing might have a really, really strong appeal for a lot of players, and maybe even for us. Did I mention weakness cards yet? I feel like I really have to, because they are hilarious in certain ways. You see, every deck has to have a certain number of weakness cards, one that's personal to the character and one that's drawn from a random pool. And every time you draw a card, you have a potential of drawing one of these, and drawing cards can sometimes be really tense because you're spending precious actions that you could be doing to, take care of a task, but you always need resources, you always need cards to help you with that. So when you spend an action and you're really hoping to draw something very, very good, and you reveal one of these, boy, does it stinking hurt. And in a way, I suspect if you're after that sort of experience, that can be a lot of fun. But here's the thing, Arkham Horror has a lot of great ideas, but I suspect that it is a game that is a little bit unsure of what it wants to be yet. That's not necessarily a problem, because again, this is just the start, and the potential for its growth is vast, and depending on its initial success, infinite. And that's great. I enjoy the fact that there are many different difficulties. So for example, if we got battered at standard, we could play easy, or we could go for a nightmare mode. And then again, we found that there are not a lot of deck building options in this game. In fact, every character has 2 colors of cards that they can put in their deck. And when we were told to build starting characters by the booklet, we essentially had to put in all the cards of those colors that we had in that box. Very unfortunately, I was offered a second box for a review sample, and I turned it down because I asked, how's the 3-4 player experience, or is this game geared more towards a 2-player experience? And I was told it's primarily a 2-player game, and I can see that because I suspect the scaling doesn't really work very well, and with 3 or 4 players it would become much, much easier to play the game. And now I regret it, because with 2 core sets, I really could have had a dabble with deck building and see whether I could improve my deck to face these really hard adventures in a more prepared way. Unfortunately, I can't comment on that, aside from saying that you'll never need more than 2 core sets to have the full sort of deck building experience going forwards from there. So that's kind of my take on Arkham Horror, the living card game. It's great in some ways and not in others. It's one step forward and one step backward. It has the potential to be a really, really excellent game. But whether it is that, we'll just have to wait and see.
My mama cooks in Italy, my mama swims in Argentina, mama's got a chunga, yeah. My mama's works in Venezuela, mama like